The book of James. Well, this is a good reminder that numerous books of the New Testament were written during the period recorded in the book of Acts. So James is written by, it appears, based just on who has the authority to speak this way, by calling himself James, the name or the word James, the very brother of Jesus. James the apostle had been killed in chapter 12 of Acts in AD 44, so this couldn't have been written by him at this stage. The only other alternative is the leader of the Jerusalem church, which we're going to meet in Acts 15. His name is James, the brother of Jesus. He did not believe in his brother as Messiah during their childhood, but it seems that after the ascension, James becomes a believer with his brother Jude, and they will become co-leaders of the Jerusalem church. It is written to in 1:1, James 1:1, to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad. We could call this or these displaced, believing Jews. Now, remember that since 586, the destruction of the first temple and the exile in the Old Testament, that most Jews by this point, 600 years ago, most Jews live outside the Holy Land. Most Jews do not live in Judea. So what James is doing is speaking to his brethren, the believing Jew, who are living really around the world. So Egypt and Ephesus, and even as far as Rome. So the letter is meant to be spread. So why the letter, or really it's a sermon when we think about it and look at its style? First of all, the leaders of early Christianity were all Jews. Second, these leaders were concerned mainly with Jews. Even Paul, who goes off to win the Gentile, as it were, goes to synagogues, and he will say in a couple of his books, to the Jew first. So I think all Jews, including Paul, saw the story of salvation as emanating from, even within, the life of the Jew and the family of Abraham. And so that's where, or why, James is writing to Jews. And number 3, from Rome's point of view, it will not be until AD 64, after the book of Acts ends, that they think of Jesus' followers, Rome that is, how Rome thinks of Jesus' followers, they will think of them all as Jews. The idea of Christians being a separate religion from Judaism, again, does not happen till after the book of Acts is finished. And yet, again, why is the book being written by James to these Jews? Here's where it comes into our story in Acts. Gentile Christians are joining believing Jews, not as proselytes, but as those who are retaining their Gentile background. So again, it's good just in our mind's eye to think about how this would look. I would, as a Gentile, go to a synagogue, I would worship, I would talk about Jesus the Messiah, then I would go back and eat meat sacrificed to idols, to my family gods, because I knew it was just meat. And again, we'll talk about that in Romans and 1 Corinthians. I wouldn't observe Sabbath, so I would wave to my Jewish believing friend as I went to work on Saturday morning. These are all offensive to the Jews for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And so that's really what's setting up the book of James. So number 5, the people needed to stop saying, here's where James comes into play, stop saying, just saying, that you love the Gentile believer and start acting as though you actually do. Loyalty without works, faith without works is dead, chapter 2. That's not a diatribe against Pauline Christianity and faith or salvation by faith alone. That's said before Paul ever says that. Of course, in Romans, this is very early. And James is just making the case that loyalty without showing it horizontally doesn't work. God's not interested in that. So the idea that Christianity was being lived out on a very practical level is emphasized by a book, or many books, of course, but this is a quote from Ben Witherington in a book called Invitation to the New Testament. I just like his line here. The differences in early Christianity had far more to do with practice than with belief. And by the way, that's why I will not take Paul's writings as doctrinal treatises. He's not trying to write a doctrine, especially a set of doctrines that compete with the Old Testament or even with Jesus. He is talking about how this is really how the New Testament writings will play out. We cannot say that we love the Gentile and God's plan to accept the Gentile while loving Yahweh. We must, let's do it now. We must make this just as important as this, because if we say this and we live this out, we have to live out the way God is running his church, as it were. So back to it. The differences in early Christianity had far more to do with practice than belief. The challenge had to do with how to incorporate Gentiles into what was then a largely Jewish collection of believers in Jesus. While James probably did believe that Jewish Christians should be observant Jews when they were in Jewish settings, at least, he did not impose such rules on Gentiles. And that will be where we step back into the book of Acts next time and listen to the edict of the Jerusalem Council. But to the book of James, these are to the 12 tribes scattered abroad, 1:1, greeting. Be steadfast, be unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord. Do not be double-minded. What that means is don't think in terms of, do I worship Yahweh and my God, my ancestral deities from my Greco-Roman background? Again, these are displaced Jews. They're living in very pagan territory. So their temptation is to be double-minded, to worship Yahweh, yes, to worship Jesus, his son at his right hand, but also to give some credence to the gods of my neighbors and such. And James is saying you cannot do that. Don't be a hearer only. Don't say that you love the Gentile. Can faith or loyalty save you? Yes, it does save you, but will it save you if you turn from it by not loving your Gentile? No. So be a doer of the gospel. Live according to the law of liberty. I think, and it's mentioned twice in our book, the law of liberty. I believe what it's talking about there is living by the liberation that has been declared for the Gentile. Again, I as a Jew am going to be bothered by his lifestyle. Well, he has been granted liberty by Jesus, again, who is now the judge. And he is giving the Gentile liberty to act in ways that the Jew would be offended by. 2:12 might be a theme of the whole book. So act and speak as though you're living by the law of liberty. This means showing, and I'm just grabbing ideas out of chapters 3, 4, and 5. You will not show partiality. You will take care of the poor, the orphan, the widow. Those are categorically thought of as lost people, remember, in Jesus' vocabulary. You'll emphasize mercy over judgment. You'll be characterized by purity, peaceableness, and openness to reason. You will learn, and remember, late in the book, he begins to say, be patient, wait until the coming of the Lord. This would cause impatience, would it not? And so he says, be patient, such as the stories of Abraham, and he mentions Rahab and Job and Elijah. People who showed both active and passive, in some sense, passive patience in the sense of just waiting for God to do what he's going to do. Most of all, and this is in chapters 4 and 5, most of all you will avoid going back to, think of again what's the opposite of being steadfast and unmovable and believing in Jesus. It would be, it's a standard way of describing the non-believer would be the person who cares about the world. So he's called rich. Those described by their love of the world. These are the double-minded. They are going to worship as many gods as can make their pocketbook grow. They're not concerned about truth as much as this world. This person, we're told, will weep and howl for the misery that will come upon him. Remember, the story still is working with the day of the Lord coming, now the day of Christ. This is the person that will undergo that judgment, not these. In a word, this is a friend of the world, not of God. So the book of James is a fitting way of stepping now into the world of Acts 14 and 15, or the Jerusalem Council of Acts 15, which we'll read next time.